Yes? Good. So, UPenn has faculty with a history of involvement in medication management. Dr. Coop was a neighbor of mine down in Bethesda after he retired from being the Surgeon General. And I told Peter that Dr. Coop was a force in the neighborhood as well as in the medical community. When he went to work in the mornings, I was often outside, and he would salute, and I'd salute back, and we had a nice exchange that way. As long as I saluted, I suppose it was all right. So I don't know how many of you knew him, but he, like some others, was really a force in medicine and society. His quote, "Drugs don't work if people don't take them." And it's still very widely acknowledged. We'll go back into some history a little later and change. Peter mentioned my strange name. I can't help it. My great-grandfather, we were not Catholic, so he didn't choose a saint's name, and it's probably just as well because his progeny probably wouldn't have lived up to a sainted name. I certainly wouldn't. But he chose Orville Napoleon Monroe. It was the time. The Wright brothers had been along. I did invent a couple of things, but I elected not to spend much time in the military. I have had a significant connection to combination products and telemedicine. We'll define combination products on the next slide. But telemedicine, a combination product. One of the first civilian combination products was an item that's had a lot of press recently, the EpiPen. You've probably seen a number of articles about EpiPen and pricing and the like. I was very fortunate to work for a company that originally developed the EpiPen, and proud to have been part of a life-saving product. Maybe not so proud of some of the recent history, but the market is speaking, so we'll see where that all goes. Telemedicine. The same gentleman who invented the auto-injector, which became the EpiPen, was an early proponent of telemedicine. He invented, and in the 70s, early 70s, began a cardiac monitoring program. There was no internet. There was no cell phone. So we were doing analog transcriptions, tried to take that signal on the other end. It was clunky at best, but it was a precursor to some of the things that we're now seeing. So personally, I'm fascinated by the area, and I'm fascinated to be here. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad for your interest. Personal information not on the bio. Well, Peter mentioned that we met, found commonality of interest. There are many people who you will meet, I will meet, Peter will meet, everyone will meet, who have something to add. One of my reasons for liking to be at these kinds of meetings is I want to learn. So I'll give some information, but I'm looking for some other information on your thoughts. It'll become pretty clear when we open that up. But if you, at any time, if you have something you want to say, come in. I do have intellectual property interest in medication management. Those are shown at the site, which is here. This is being recorded. It's available to you afterward. And if you have questions or you want to contact me directly, then my contacts are at the site shown here. One sentence objective. Provide introduction to connected medication delivery systems. And if you look at the little graphic up at the top, it's some medication container talking to one of these and somehow getting that information back to the people who need to know it. You'll see more on that later. But I do want to provoke your thoughts, your interest, and understand more about what you're thinking. I'll do a glossary just very quickly because there are some terms that come up in the conversation. Accountable care organization, I don't know what that's going to look like in the future. No one does. There will be value-based purchasing systems, though. Managing medications is part of the ACO mission. It's part of value-based purchasing. I'm told we have a number of people here who are interested in pharmacy as well as in the practice of medicine. So they're the same and different. I see a smile. Are you a pharmacist?
Pharmacy student.
All right. Good. Well, I'm glad to have pharmacy here because there's a lack of clarity about who's going to be responsible for medication therapy management. And there are a lot of people who are playing in that area, and we'll have to see where it goes. But you're part of finding out where it goes. Thanks for coming. AIDC, Automated Identity and Data Capture. Those are the barcodes that you see on that can of soda or the bottle of water in front of you. Only recently has the healthcare industry decided they want to engage in automated identity and data capture beginning at the manufacturer. So there are two pieces of regulation legislation that have come along. One is Unique Device Identifier, and the other is the Drug Supply Chain Security Act. So those two are mandating, going back to the manufacturer, putting on some kind of barcode. It could be a barcode or it could be RFID, radio frequency identification. Both of those are enablers for medication management all the way through to the patient's hands. Biopharma, well, okay, you have traditional pharmaceuticals, small molecules, biologicals, specialty pharma. What is specialty pharma? Usually it began as the biologicals, but now you look at the Hep C drugs, and those are specialty pharma because they are expensive, require management, and they're an issue. They're an oral dosage form issue, so they would qualify, I would think, as specialty pharma as well. So for this discussion, everything that needs to be controlled, call it biopharma, call it biotech, call it specialty pharma, but the things that need to be controlled. It's not necessarily your daily aspirin. In fact, arguably, who cares? Miss a dose? Who cares? But the products that are critical and need to be managed, that's where we're concentrating, and that's where the money is. Connected drug delivery product. Okay, that again is a container that's able to talk with a communications device. Plan sponsor. Okay, those are the people who actually pay the bills. They're the payers, the employers who are sponsoring insurance plans. The real payers. Now the real payers more and more are government and individuals as healthcare is changing. So all of these people have a role, an interest in managing medications. An FDA term, risk evaluation mitigation strategy. If I put an EpiPen in a child's hand, how am I going to make sure that that you've taken cognizance of the risks? So this is one of the FDA's major thrusts. There are a lot of guidances coming out. We don't have time to talk about them all, but there's a lot of discussion at FDA about risk evaluation and mitigation. There's also a lot of discussion about, well, those clinical trials that we've been doing all along, they're not telling us what we really want to know. Let's get real-world evidence and real-world data. So there's a lot of focus on understanding post-marketing surveillance, gathering real-world evidence. Again, one of the ways to do that, patient experience. So FDA is moving into a program called Sentinel, where they're monitoring what people are saying on the internet, in the blogs, about pharmaceutical products. So the discussion with industry is, don't you want to understand it? Don't you have a role in understanding that? Answer is becoming yes. More later. So this is not new. Hippocrates, another controversial individual, said, watch over the faults of patients which often make them lie about taking the things prescribed. That's why journals are often not so reliable. The patient wants to make a good discussion, make a good impression on his providers. So the way to do that is to say, yes, I always take my meds. I won't ask how many of you don't comply. Back to Dr. Coop's discussion, well known. But here's another individual who's weighed in. He's also a little bit controversial. How many have heard of Everett Coop? Most everyone. Well, we're here in the Translational Medicine Center. Eric is one of the people who is very, very much a leader in translational medicine. His quote from his most recent book, Patient Will See You Now, focuses on the problem, and he says it represents an important, if not the most important, reason for failure of management of chronic diseases. Anyone agree? Anyone disagree? I don't know if it is the most important, but I would pose that it is a very important. Okay, here are the potential system elements, just as a reminder. You have, let's see if this works. Yeah, you have a medication container, can be anything like that, which talks to, in patent language, a communications device with both a long and a short range communications capability. So you can use your smartphone to read a barcode, sense an RFID, and you can also add other information which is coming through apps or from other sources to better understand what's happening with the patient. So if you don't know what meds are being taken, you may not know what those mean. All of this going into somewhere, maybe CVS, I don't know, maybe Philips, happens to be the largest supplier of personal emergency response systems in the U.S. with their Lifeline. They're also a major force in medical devices and monitoring of certain conditions. So who's going to lead in this? I don't think we know yet, but these are the system elements that go into medication telemanagement, medication management, adherence, compliance, whatever you want to call it. That whole discussion, I'll use medication management for a reason I'll talk about. So where did these connected devices began with pills? Why? Because most of industry understood the taking of pills. It was the largest dosage form that they were thinking about, pills, capsules, oral dosage forms. So almost all of the early devices talked about oral dosage forms. Arguably not the most important. That moved into, with biotech, a lot of other products that went to how do we manage, how do we monitor biotech drugs, biopharma, in the hands of patients. Pharmaceutical companies used to think of supply chain as what went out of their warehouse. They didn't so much focus on what happened after. Now that these products are going into patients' hands, watch the nightly news and see how many auto-injectors you find. These products in the patient's hands, FDA is more concerned about human factors, and companies are investing heavily. Going back to EpiPen, this one is not on the market yet, but it's a case that allows you to understand if your daughter has the EpiPen with her. So if she left it at home, it sends the daughter and the parent a signal, conceivably, depending on how it's set up. Other auto-injectors, and this is Teva's product for inhaled products. There are a number of other companies there, some recent approvals. Last week we had several other approvals. Back to oral dosage forms and connectivity. Have here a product you're probably familiar with. It's had a lot of press. A tablet or pill with a chip which then talks to a patch, which talks to the communications device. So it's coming around more and more to connectivity in the dosage form. Recent approvals. We've had now in the last year 2 diabetes devices which are granted FDA approval, which allow you to connect a sensor to a pump, to other information through a communications device. So far, most of the communications devices are dedicated, but they're now moving toward smartphone connectivity as well. So this is the closed loop version. It still requires professional intervention. The pump needs to be refilled. One of the major reasons for recalls of pumps is patient error in refilling. So this is, though, a major advance. The state of the industry, back to history. So before 2010, little was really done to ensure medication adherence. I know that some of the UPenn affiliates now still have a room full of people calling their patients to ask if they took their medication. Maybe there are better ways. We'll see. Traditionally, the pharmaceutical industry was comfortable just saying, okay, we got a clinical trial, we got it approved, our product we can now market, and we're going to just go sell that, and we're going to detail the doctors and not worry about whether the patients take the meds or not. What's happened with value-based purchasing is the payers are asking, and the plan sponsors are asking, and the patients are asking, is your product better than someone else's? So whereas prior to 2010 there wasn't any focus, now they're looking at it more carefully. Many people are looking at it more carefully. Biotech generally happened after 2010. A lot of the introductions and a lot of the future introductions. If you look at the backlog at FDA of how many products are at FDA out of the biotech industry, it's massive. It's over half the products. Half the products awaiting approval at FDA are biotech. 2005, WHO, more health benefit from boosting adherence than from developing new ones. Okay, a discussion was not really acknowledged prior to 2010. One of the papers you'll see most often here is the New England Journal talking about the $300 billion in unnecessary annual health cost because patients don't take their meds. That paper does not include other societal cost. It's just direct, unnecessary medical cost. 2010 also, we had the Accountable Care Act, Affordable Care Act. We'll see where that goes. 2012, especially as related to the pharma industry, lost revenue because scripts aren't filled. So, moving forward, enabling technologies have come along. This one, most everyone has one now. There's some discussion in industry saying that the people we really need to help don't have smartphones. Well, if they have grandchildren, they're likely to have a smartphone soon. Looking at my cohort, most all grandparents, if they want to have connectivity to their children and grandchildren, are forced to buy into the technology. It's happening. There are a lot of disruptive technologies. Cloud computing, a lot of other data storage models, things that are eliminating some of the proprietary models. They have not yet broken through the EMR proprietary situation, though. That one is for another discussion, too complicated. But there are other emergencies or emerging technologies, small sensors, low power, Bluetooth, the barcodes we've talked about, a lot of work in predictive analytics, many apps wearables, how does FDA approve them, the whole Internet of Things. So all of these are enablers. Disease and therapy trends. You know this better than I. Treatment cycles, people living longer, better diagnosis, all of that. Specialty drugs, a lot of press recently. Pharma, in my opinion, is looking at how do we get beyond all that negative press. One way is to add value. How do you add value? By providing service. Again, I have a point of view. We'll come later to some opposing points of view. So I say medication management because it goes beyond adherence. If you look at the biotech products, they are fairly sensitive, heat, temperature, light, storage, so they have to be carefully controlled from the point of view of the pharmaceutical companies and the patients and the payers. So biotech products, parenteral administration. This wasn't recognized in 2006. Everyone said, well, why are you looking at auto-injectors? Well, because it's not only epinephrine, but biotech is coming, and biotech generally does not like to go through the stomach, for obvious reasons, and mobile technology. Industry trends, a lot of focus on cancer and connectivity, a lot of cost pressure discussion, and the attempts to add value. That's on the part of practitioners, pharmacy companies, pharmacists, patients are looking for value. So the cost challenges, there are many new parenteral systems introduced. Many of them are becoming connected so that they can gather real-world evidence. And the problem, and this is why I went back into this area, I understood a little bit of what we didn't know when we fielded the first EpiPen, and we didn't know anything after it left the warehouse. And there was much that could be known. So that's why after being in industry for a long time, I wanted to go back to invention. Trends, increasing cost, real-world evidence, restrictions of access. This is going to be more and more an issue, it appears, after the election. I'm not smart enough to understand at all where it's going, but we obviously have cost issues as a society and as an industry. Those are reflected in higher deductibles, and some of the proposals that are out there, I don't believe to be responsive, but that's a personal view, and we won't go into the politics. But the issues around the supply chain are what matter, and something we can all do something about. The patient is now involved. A lot of other players in this system are involved. How are we going to manage that going forward? Everyone is trying to be understood, including the patient and the pharma company who wants to make their case. Legislative and regulatory. There's been a march toward more and more human factors work. More guidances have come out from FDA. There's now an Office of Combination Products. When the first EpiPen was introduced, there was no such thing as a combination product. A combination product, again, is a drug plus a device to deliver it, like the EpiPen. So the political systems around the world are different. My point of view is more US-centric, because that's what I know best. There are many differences, but there are also a lot of similarities. One of the things that is more and more prevalent is a demand for information, real-world evidence. Does this work? What are the interactions? What are the other factors about the patient, the supply chain, that are changing what we used to think of as, oh, it's all done. Patient has the script. We now know that he picked it up. What happens after that? Well, that's real-world evidence. Connected medication management. Oh, not much of this is new to you. It verifies dosing, but it can also, as in the case of this EpiPen device can tell you if the medication is available. Some of the apps tell you how much is still left in the vial. Some tell you, was the auto-injector dropped and broken? Was it stored inappropriately? So can alert toward condition of the medication. That's why medication management and not just adherence or compliance. And the real challenge is, if we get that information, how do we put it in a place where we can find it? That goes back into medical records and how are we going to put all this information together so it's usable and not just a stream of data. Okay. So for patients and stakeholders, improved outcomes, support for the patient, communication among all the stakeholders, and lower overall cost. Is that true? Is this going to lower cost? Any thoughts? But is it, how do you measure cost? Because a pharma company looks at it and says, we have to spend money on this. Patient looks at it and says, I have to pay for this. Society looks at it and says, if you don't take your meds, we're all screwed. So the cost is exponentially greater than the cost we would put into this system. But it is controversial. This is the element that is most often challenged in my experience. So we're going to talk about that. What are people saying about this medication management thing? A lot of things. We don't get paid for it, says a GP. My brother-in-law, for example, says, I tell my patients, and I hope they do it, but I don't get paid for doing medication counseling on an ongoing basis. I try, but nobody pays me for it. Problem. Again, another brother-in-law. I don't have time for doing this. I'm spending my evenings already entering patient information. I don't have time to see my kids. I only have 12 minutes with a patient. How do you expect me to go through the things that are on this big, long, folded form or in my database about all the interactions? And patients don't understand the words. So my time is better just diagnosing, prescribing, and hoping. I'm getting a smile there from the gentleman here. Sound familiar? What's your position? Where are you in this whole thing?
Pharmacy resident of the hospital.
Okay.
So one of the things the team likes us to do is to go to counsel
Right.
patients before they leave the hospital.
Where does dosing take place? Doesn't take place in the hospital. It takes place in the home. It takes place wherever the patient might have that. I'm sure you do a great job, but I'm sure you do. I'm sure you work very hard at it. But memory, the ability to understand your instructions, side effects, cost, many other things impinge on those efforts. So, again, what some others are saying, I'm already overwhelmed with this whole electronic medical records thing. I can't deal with all this unwanted information. I don't want to play in this game. This is the classic physician who was accustomed to having an almost godlike position. I don't want all this technology in my life. It happens. This is a younger audience than I thought it was going to be. Peter's smiling. Because, and again, I'm 70 years old. I didn't grow up around computers. They didn't exist. When I went in the Army, yes, I was in a data processing center in Seoul, Korea. I was very fortunate because I went there and not to Vietnam. But it gives some exposure, and we're all learning how to deal with all of this information and all of these possibilities. And you're going to help decide. Another one. I can't be pinged every time some patient fails to do something. Very true. I would pose the notion that the people who are making those devices we showed earlier are just putting out a lot of bright, shiny toys that often don't make a lot of sense in the workflow of either the pharmacist or the physician or the patient. That they gather information to send out a signal, but it's not adjudicated well, it's not controlled well, it's not understood, it's not understandable. So I think the device industry and the pharma industry, better said, the pharma industry supporting the device industry, needs to do a lot better job of refining these systems so that they give the people who need to know better information than they have. You look at IMS, International Medication Systems, they have shown that most apps are abandoned pretty quickly. So the app has to give something of value for the patient to keep on using it, or for the industry to keep on making it. So what about privacy? How does all this fit into HIPAA? I'm going to take it even farther. How do I understand that my information is not misused? Have any of you seen Cell by Robin Cook? No? You might want to just pick it up. It's a quick read. The premise is, without giving away the whole plot, people who are interested in saving cost in the healthcare system have developed something that's very much like this insulin delivery system. And they are abusing that information to save cost. You've heard about death panels? Well, it doesn't give it all away, but Robin Cook talks about a specific death panel with a device hooked to a cell phone, which saves a lot of money for some individuals. So that's a risk. It is a risk. And we have the need to understand and to appropriately use information without regard to the way people use information sometimes. But hacking's all over the news. What are the security threats? One of the things that is discussed is, well, perhaps it should be more like banking, that the patient's information is the patient's information, and we don't allow anyone but the patient and those he authorizes, he or she, to have any input. Complicates the system. Another comment, I've seen some of these toys and they're garbage. They don't give me anything I want. I like to talk to informed audiences because they can tell me what their view is. Have you looked at any of the medication delivery devices? Anyone? All right. Some people at Penn have. We'll go a little bit later into another slide. But you know how to contact me. If you have thoughts about this and what industry should do, let's talk. Pennsylvania has, as we spoke, has something of a leadership position in this area. UPenn in its innovation center, Pitt, several private companies, a lot of pharma companies are deeply engaged. I would encourage you, if you want to stay, if you're interested in this area, to become engaged and go to the site. You may find some information there that's interesting, but I'd like to learn from you. So, patients abandon the apps, and the last one, Obamacare is going to be repealed, and all of this was part of Obamacare, and it's all garbage, and we don't want to deal with it. I hear that. I have an opinion, and it probably would become raucous if we open it up to too much discussion on this, but my opinion is that no matter who's in charge, the healthcare system is broken, that we need to do a better job of understanding what the patient is doing and help the patient and all the other stakeholders, caregivers, everyone who's involved in this. Help folks do better at coming to the outcomes that pharma was devised to bring about. So, I'm not alone, fortunately, because some others are saying this is an opportunity. We can do more with this. The technology's there. And oh, by the way, we can make some money at it. Or we can make sure that patients understand that our drug is better than the competitor's drug, or better than the generic, or better than the biosimilar, or our biosimilar is better than somebody else's biosimilar. So there is a lot of money being spent here, a lot of investment being made, and pharmacists are saying, oh, we sell things. We can sell these devices. So it's a revenue stream. Also, a lot of people are looking at who should be the groups, the people selling the service, because we all do want to be paid for what we provide. Otherwise, the organization falls apart. So, basic question, who should lead here? Should it be the pharmaceutical companies? They have a lack of trust recently. Should it be the government, as they say in the South? Well, they're not so well trusted at this point, and we don't know where they're going with the programs. Is the health coordinator, HIT coordinator, is that office going to be filled at all? Is it going to go back to CMS, Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services? Is there going to be a block on new regulations at FDA? Unlikely, in my opinion. But those are all open questions which you're going to be working to answer. And so am I, and so are all of our colleagues. So one of our colleagues is, again, UPenn. Roy Rosen, Chief Innovation Officer. He sends his regrets because he's traveling today. But I spoke with him a few days ago, and a few quotes. Biggest problem in healthcare is how do we get paid for the value of the services we offer? Many innovations are stalled because there's no viable model for payment. Some aspects of Obamacare may be delayed based upon the election. CMS intends to move forward with value-based purchasing. Clinical teams will manage high-risk solutions, but many tasks can be taken over by intelligent systems and lower-credentialed individuals. There are people who oppose this last part. I don't believe they're going to prevail, because I believe that right will out, and we will eventually see more technology used appropriately and used effectively and efficiently. But again, you're the ones who are going to do it, or not. So, let's open up to questions and comments. What thoughts? Have I said anything that was new?
I'll use the chairman's prerogative to pull in and
You're allowed, Peter.
start with, you mentioned earlier on Everett Coop.
Yes.
Everett Coop is an extremely controversial character,
Oh,
as
yes.
you know. I don't know how many of you have seen
I had a lot of hands raised.
This man was on The Tonight Show. He's a very engaging, very articulate physician who makes claims. He can do everything with an iPhone. And he demonstrated, I think, on The Tonight Show, having his blood pressure, his blood glucose, and everything, all coming out on the iPhone. But Eric Topol has made predictions about the implementation of this technology in a time span, because I went to a meeting when he was a plenary speaker. There's an audience of about 2,000. Eric Topol gave us the works on what this new technology that was coming and what it would achieve. And at the end of the meeting, someone said to me, "Peter, what did you think?" And I said, "I'm not sure, but I don't know what he's smoking."
Well, it's California after all.
The reason for this is that in his earlier publications, he made forecasts about companies and products. Most of the products, not all, many of the companies that he absolutely supported and approved of have all gone belly up. Not because of technical, but that's the world. That's the diagnostic industry. And it's the time frame. So I'm coming to my question really. One of the things you didn't state is what sort of time frame are we likely to see? And this is coupled with the fact that I'm involved with a biotech company in genomics. Genomics at the moment is stalled, totally stalled, because of FDA approval and CMS approval on reimbursement and other issues. The whole genomics industry is clogged because of the government is worried about the cost of this, and therefore their answer is don't approve any. And I think in this area, I wonder if you'd care to tackle the issue of timing. Are we likely to see in the next 5 years or 10 years major inroads into the technology you've described?
As they say on every newscast, great question. We don't know. Personal history. I started filing patent applications in 2006. So I've got 10 more years to run on those, and I've filed some others. I know that Peter understands the intellectual property process. I couldn't afford, personally, to develop these products. But I did have some ideas about where they were likely to go, and now we have some partnerships and some prospective partnerships with some of these companies. I think it's going to be very, very selective. No one company has the iPhone. No one company has the lock. But there are companies who have done things which are very, very creative and save lives and improve the outcomes of patients. So it's not monitoring, did you take your vitamins today, Grandpa? It's monitoring, if you don't take this product, we won't pay for it. There's some discussion about Harvoni. We won't pay for Harvoni if we don't understand pretty well that you're taking the whole course daily. Well, that's a little draconian, but it's also $60,000, $80,000 for the course of the treatment. So I think we're going to see a number of introductions, additional introductions, that make a lot of sense. The injection device, post-cancer treatment, great idea. Not connected. Doesn't need to be connected. But if you'd looked 5 years ago, would you have said that that would be on the market now? Probably not. It's de novo. It's wow. It's new. 27. Pardon?
Which device are you referring to?
This is post-cancer. You're attaching an auto-injector 27 hours after you finish your treatment. You receive the injection, Invanex. Great idea. Not connected. Doesn't need to be connected. But 5 years ago, wasn't thought of by anyone, maybe some engineer somewhere. But it was, if you pose the notion, would FDA be likely to approve that? Don't know. Recently attended Parenteral Drug Association. It's pharma and all the companies making injectors, and FDA. And there is so much emphasis on the need to administer at home that we're seeing some real breakthroughs. The election may bring some of them. You've got 21st Century Cures Act coming through, and Energy and Commerce Committee has pushed a lot of information on that. Some think it might even get some action during lame duck, but others say no, no way. So moving FDA to the position of introducing products without demanding that there be zero risk. Recent meeting with FDA, someone said, you can't label to avoid stupidity. And you can't. I mean, if a patient's going to do something that your label says don't do it, it may not be possible to engineer the product such that he can't do it. It's controversial. If you look at why, yes, please.
I think an important consideration is motivation. So, I mean, that's a pretty good global statement.
Yeah, I agree.
In this particular space as well. And you can have a lot of technologies that if people are not using them, they're useless. It's no different than not taking your medication. If you introduce technology that accords with someone's goals, let me give you an example. Uber.
Yes.
Uber, I think personally, I mean, I use it all over the world, and I use it frequently, and I think it's really pretty much a substantial advance in terms of transportation. And it's very, who here has used Uber?
Full house. Yeah.
Right, I mean,
I'll interrupt though. I wouldn't touch Uber with a barge pole in London. That's the deal.
Okay. Selective application.
It's not perfect, but it's really a creative breakthrough.
Sure.
And it uses technology very effectively, but it's not the technology alone that made it possible. It's a
Useful.
niche. It's a service, and there's a motivation, a high degree of motivation to use it.
Right.
Taking medications is inherently a different problem. And so I think it requires solutions that address the motivation to take medication. I'm not sure what the answer is, but I think that's a good question.
Peter,
Well,
sure.
On one of your early slides, you had something which looked like an iPad. It is in fact a pillbox. The pillbox is, you know the one I'm talking about. The pillbox is linked to that there. You just put that on the left.
Mm-hmm.
Now that, my wife takes several pills over the day. I can't remember how many times a week she says, "Did I take my pills?" Because she refuses to use something like this, or has not. In the real world, whereas someone, if it's loaded at the beginning of the week, by the end of the week, you know exactly what you've done. But how many of those are? I don't know. Is that a common device in the real world?
I use it at my pharmacy.
Yeah.
I work for an independent pharmacy, and we do it's paper.
Right.
It looks exactly like that for the week. So we do have that option. It is something that we have to pay for. Insurance won't cover something like that, but we do have.
There are probably 15 or 20 companies who have done something like this. If you look at pill dispenser, just Google it, you'll see a range of things. It goes from the simplest ones, which is the 7-day, which lots of folks have, to ones that are automated. Again,
But people should be discharged from hospital carrying something like that, ideally, I would have thought.
cost, complexity. What do we do with the data? Who's going to manage all this? That's
Storage and handling as well. So we work in the something a lot of the oral products can't be
Right.
taken out of the packaging.
Right.
There are other nuances to it.
well, there.
We do use those mostly for our non-compliant. We have criteria that we determine who's more at risk, because some of those patients are just using it.
And one of the packaging companies, MWV, has done blister packs with sensors on the blister. Some of the companies that you may be working with pre-package the pharma for the patient going into this kind of device. So they're putting the dosage together so that it's refilled by the pharmacy. I don't know how fast some of these are going to go. The concentration so far is on the critical products. That's where parenteral drug is focused. On the critical products that we know need better control. Back to the EpiPen experience, people hate to inject, they're afraid of injecting, but now we're asking them to inject at home. Going back to one of your comments about Eric Topol. Eric Topol, one of the companies that he talked about, made the Wall Street Journal again today, and it is whistleblower Shook Theranos and his family.
You're talking about Theranos. Are you familiar with Theranos? The reason I say it is that I wrote a long article which was published last month on that very thing because
Right.
Elizabeth Holmes
Yeah.
was our guest speaker here in Philadelphia 2 months ago. And
Well-
I was asked to write what I felt about Theranos before she spoke, what I thought about what she said, and what I believe would happen in the future. And it's very interesting that Theranos, though, is, I'll leave it back to you.
Yeah, some people may not in the audience know what Theranos is.
Okay, Walgreens bought into Elizabeth Holmes' discussion that she could take one drop of blood and test for virtually everything. Peter's more expert at this than I am, but it was garbage.
She's a dropout from Stanford. No, sorry, she didn't graduate. Dropout who has a very influential father. But her father was friends with Schultz, most of George Bush's cabinet advisors.
Mhm.
And the net result was she had an idea that it would revolutionize blood testing. And what she did, she said, I'm going to change the world. And from a finger stick, I will do up to 140 blood tests at almost zero cost. Because of the board of directors that she assembled due to her father's influence, the company grew in the matter of 5 to 6 years to be worth on paper $9 billion. And she got contracts. She refused categorically to explain the technology. She was not prepared to present any work at scientific or clinical meetings about the technology. And then she made deals with Walmart, most of them, CMS, and lots of major pharmacies across the country who would take the blood. She developed a little blood container, and the pharmacists would take the finger stick, the bloods would go to Elizabeth Holmes' regional laboratory. And it seemed as though it was going to explode. Except that a lot of the results were very good. And the quality soon came to the surface. And once it came to the surface, there was an investigation done. And it was realized that she wasn't using her super duper little new technology. She was using the established technology, apart from 1 or 2 tests. And then what happened is that the Wall Street Journal started to investigate her. And the Wall Street Journal has done a thorough investigation of her over the last 2 or 3
2 years.
The net result is the very first public disclosure she made about the technology was here in Philadelphia at the end of July at the American Association for Clinical Chemistry meeting. Trouble, she's lost all the contracts with the pharmacies, and the estimated value of the company is now down to a few $100,000. She fired 40% of her staff. She says she's still going to concentrate on this thing. And how anyone can go from 0
For the most,
That's, she's an acolyte of Joe's. She wears a collar sweater, a black suit, and she's a very attractive young lady, but she's also a cop.
the journal story today is about George Schultz's son.
He was another one of the Bush cabinet, I think.
No, but Schultz's son turned her in, and it caused great acrimony in the family. But to the point made by the gentleman back here, the technology has to serve a need. It has to be real. It has to work. It has to survive the rigors of FDA, and hopefully will come to some moderation of the approval system, because right now there are many, as your IT director, innovation director said, there are technologies which are not approved because we're not paid for them or because we can't get FDA approval for them. So it's up to you and all of our colleagues who are trying to improve healthcare. I think it's an important area. I know we've come to 1 o'clock, but I'm willing to stay for as long as someone wants to talk.
Any other questions?
Yes?
Just a quick question. Do you have a resource that you would suggest for how do we evaluate? There's so many, as you mentioned, there's a lot of different companies that are looking.
It's probably going to fall to you to do a lot of it yourself. Because if you go to the site, you'll see a number. There's an article which we published. I may have a copy of it here, which I'm glad to leave for you. It's at the site, but resource has our graphic on the front, but you know, it's going into this journal talks a lot about what's important. It is publicizing some of the individual companies. This one and one other journal I would recommend. The other journal's not at the site, but there are a couple of journals that have come out recently. This is called On Drug Delivery. And again, it's at the site. I try to put things at our site that may be of interest, but as far as evaluating all of the individual companies, not yet. There's a company called Informa that is saying that they're going to publicize all of the forward-looking applications for connected drug delivery, all of the combination products. So at this point, Informa publishes on the drugs that are waiting approval, but their intent is to put out something that talks about the delivery devices and the pharma and which are using which. So far I haven't seen it. I've seen some beta trials, but if you give me a card, I'll try to remember to send that to you when it pops. They should be introducing it now, but they haven't yet said that it's available.
I'd like to thank Mr. Monroe for a stimulating talk. Thank you very much.
I thank you all. Thank you for your attention. And again, if you want to be in touch, my contacts are at the site. If you want to leave a card, I'll make sure you're on for distribution when we send information out. So,
Thank you all for coming.
thank you.